Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Another political dynasty fell to the grassroots Americans when Liz Cheney lost. Her loss represents more glaring evidence beyond President Trump's election of the deep dissatisfaction with both conventional politicians and the establishment for their lack of courage against the left and their refusal to address many issues that have fallen outside of their conventional views of conservatism. Today's guest has created an organization whose stated mission is, quote, to address the fact that many establishment voices have still not come to terms with the necessary corrective actions needed to fulfill the America First phenomenon. God, country, and community are at the heart of this agenda. These are the corrective actions the Center for Renewing America was built to champion, and our effectiveness in framing and winning the policy battles on these central issues will bring opportunity for renewal across the nation, close quote. Russ Vought is president of the Center for Renewing America, and prior to founding the center, he served as a member of President Trump's cabinet and was responsible for overseeing the implementation of the president's policy, management, and deregulatory agendas across the executive branch. He worked as the director of Office of Management and Budget for nearly 2 years, first in acting capacity and then as a confirmed director by the Senate. During the Trump administration, OMB was a key office in pushing for conservative victories and helped President Trump cut through the bureaucracy. During his 4 years at OMB, Russ was one of Trump's most trusted and competent managers. Russ, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir. We're glad to have you with us.
My pleasure. It's good to be on your show.
First of all, I want to thank you for your service at OMB. I've seen a lot of OMB directors in my 30 plus years of government service, and nobody has outperformed you in what you did for the President of the United States in fulfilling his agenda and his policies. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
The Center for Renewing America, why did you create that? It's my understanding you're the founder.
I am. Yeah. There was a lot of things that we had set up for a second term, but there was also a number of deep-seated correctives that I thought needed to be addressed, even within the conservative movement, that I think explain why we've been largely ineffective over decades in being able to reverse the liberal onslaught. We've had successes at the margins, and certainly I wouldn't want to minimize those. But in terms of, we're on the verge of losing our country. And we've had successive Republican presidents and Republican majorities. And I really think it was only until Donald Trump came to office that we figured out not just two important things. Number one, we figured out the issue set that is vital, those cultural issues. That is why he was such an existential threat to the Democrat Party of the left. But I also think that we were able to understand and learn how to fight for the first time. And our organization bottles both of those. It's the focus on the cultural agenda and winning those debates, and the fearlessness that we have seen and learned serving in the Trump administration. And we looked around and we thought there was a lot of great organizations, but we think this is a particular gap that's critical to not let us go back on the progress and the correctives that we saw over the last 4 years.
Well, that's quite a mission, quite a set of objectives. And you're right. For those of us that live outside of the Beltway and don't work day to day in the Beltway arena, we're very frustrated with the Republican Party, especially in their inability or unwillingness to take on the issues that matter to keep us the United States of America. And a few weeks ago, your organization was mentioned in an Axios article about the preparation for the next Trump administration, or maybe even the next presidency, regardless of whether President Trump runs or not, in preparing a manpower pool of America First personnel to go in and take over the American bureaucracy. And it mentioned your organization. Can you flesh out what the role of CRA is going to be in that effort?
Well, we are very interested in both the paradigms and the tools necessary for future conservatives in an administration to be able to get a handle on their agencies. And the Schedule F proposal was something that the president implemented at the very end of the first 4 years. And it gave people like me the ability to classify career civil servants who do policy work for the president in a Schedule F classification that would allow us to manage them and potentially let them go if they were not abiding by expectations for the job. And that obviously is unheard of post Woodrow Wilson in the civil service reforms of the turn of the century. So this was fairly monumental. I classified 90% of our organization as Schedule F. And so we were on the move. And so we didn't get an opportunity for that next 4 years. But we want to make sure that we have that's a perfect example of a tool that when whoever's the next conservative president, when they go to select a cabinet, that they know, all right, this person's not getting the job if they're not all in on implementing Schedule F. And there may be other similar paradigm shifts that are necessary on an agency by agency basis. And I think that's where the real hard work is. Yes, we need better people and we need America First, an America First administration, no doubt about it. But I believe in our vantage point, we're going to spend our time as a limited organization, fairly new, it's only our second year, focused on those paradigms that I don't believe you can do without. You can even have the best person come in, and if they don't know how to put their hands into the glove and wield that power and to change decades worth of precedent and have the courage and confidence to do that, we're still not going to have an effective administration that the American people are expecting. And so that's how we want to spend our time.
And so how will you prepare prospective individuals for appointments to do exactly that? And I think I know what you mean. Put your hand in the glove that wields the sword, but you have to know how to operate that at the moment that you put it in there.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, we want to nationalize issues. So the fact that these two words called Schedule F we're now having a national conversation about something that sounds really technical. That's exactly what we do. We want to nationalize those types of issues so that anyone wanting to do the job says, they actually mention it in their job interview. I'm going to be the biggest proponent of Schedule F that you will have in your cabinet. That's what we want. But we also want to hire and associate ourselves with fighters. And that's why we do something that's different than other organizations. When we see people that are over the target and the left is trying to ruin their life and their career, we want to throw the life raft and dive in and help them and then put them at the controls of our ship to be able to help put them to use, because they have incredible knowledge and experience and the ability to fight. And that's what's lacking. And so, someone like Jeff Clark that this has raised the ire of the January 6th committee unfairly, only because he wanted to investigate voter fraud at the Department of Justice. He's the kind of person we want at the Center for Renewing America. Kash Patel, who was feared when he walked the halls of the intel agencies and the Pentagon, has a lot of expertise when it comes to the deep state. We want someone like that, and he's a senior fellow. Those are the types of people that we believe have proven credibility, know-how. Ken Cuccinelli, Deputy Secretary at Homeland Security. They have the ability to do the job, and we have the ability to to say to the country, listen to us, because these people have done the job and they can put out policies and ideas that other people can then come along and implement them at a given point.
That's fantastic news, Russ, and I hope that it results in the ability to get interview packages to the President of the United States. I want President Trump to run again, so I'll just use President Trump as an example in this case, because I have heard from probably up to 50 men and women that could never get their interview package up to the president to get an opportunity to make a decision, because the people that were doing the vetting and the screening of those packages weren't exactly America First. So I hope this structure of this and the way the organization and the people you mentioned are fantastic folks. I follow them all and I appreciate their service and I feel a kinship with them. But we've got to make sure that those packages can get to a Donald Trump, so he or she has the opportunity to actually select from a fantastic pool of people that probably haven't worked inside the Beltway very often.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I think that would be what we saw in the last year of the administration is the president was really getting a handle on people and put in places that shared his America's First vision. If he chooses to run, I think that's what you would see if the American people give him another 4 years, and I think that they would. And I think the transition that he would run would speak to that specific concern that I saw as well as a member of the transition team.
Yeah, that's really good news, because that's the second most often thing I hear from Trump voters and people that would vote for him, is that, personnel is policy. So we got to figure that out. It sounds like we've got a team that's or a couple of different teams that are well on their way to doing that. And I appreciate the CRA's work in that area. I love your website, especially the policy issues section of it, Russ. Can we talk through a couple of those? Let's start with endless war policy. I mean, y'all are people after my heart. I'm a military guy that's fought in the endless wars, but also served at a time in the Cold War where we used a policy of realism and non-intervention, but through strength, to bring down an enemy like the Soviet Union successfully without going into combat and taking over countries and those kinds of things. What proposals will y'all make as we go into a new administration to really make sure that this endless war policy is over? Because when we left Afghanistan, a lot of people that are naive thought, oh, it's over. We're done with this policy. We're going to turn back to a policy of realism and non-interventionist and peace through strength, but we didn't. We're back in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, no, this is one of those three main correctives that we started the center for. We think we've been, too imperialistic on the right, and so we want to have create a new school, build on the work of the realisms of the past, and to ensure that when a conservative goes through the career here in Washington, D.C. or across the country, that there's actually a school of thought that really wasn't available when I was coming up through the movement. It was really a neocon school of thought, and you kind of had to have a change of mind to think of things a different way. We want to provide a different school, and so we may lose votes like we did on the NATO expansion, but previously those have been battles that we didn't even have a conversation about. Previously we would have just passed those things by UC as opposed to educating the country about the stakes of doubling the border with the Russian country, at which that would require us because of our treaty commitments, locked in to go to war if Russia or that country would take steps and dial things up along their border. And we just know it also just leads to a lack of seriousness of purpose. The most recent thing is on Twitter. You have the Prime Minister of Finland that's going to rage parties. They don't take the same seriousness to the job of defending themselves when all of a sudden we have extended the security blanket of the United States, are committing our blood and our treasure on their behalf when it's primarily their responsibility. And we're just locked in this Cold War or this World War II mindset that I think is really, really troubling. So that's just one example, but we want to be thinking about it from the standpoint of America first interest in every sector. We want to prepare for China. We want to change how we think about Europe. We want to make sure we're actually thinking about the national security issue with regard to a cartel state on our border with Mexico not having a sovereign control of its entirety of its country, given the cartels that are at work. So there's a host of things that are going to be part of our activities on that. A lot of it centered around the foundation of nationalism and rehabilitating that term, because we think it is so important that we have an alternative to secular progressive globalism. And what that means for the next administration, I think that it informs the paradigms and the ways that a future administration thinks about itself. So it's not just, all right, the president has a particular view, but everyone else in the National Security Council does not. And that's what I saw at OMB, is I'd read these briefing papers for a principals meeting, and I'm thinking, has anyone ever talked to the president about this? Because this is not what he thinks. He doesn't think like this. And so OMB would register its nay vote. But in those, there wasn't enough of a consensus within the administration that the president actually had a somewhat historic understanding of foreign policy and what that should mean in terms of the particulars of what we were dealing with. And we've got to change that now for whoever sits in that office down the road.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. The smears of nationalist, look, there's nothing wrong with being in favor of your own country first. Every country acts in their own interest, whether they play homage to the global community or international community or not, unless you're General Milley. Apparently, he swore an oath to the international community instead of the U.S. Constitution, apparently. But you're right. I mean, President Trump's he's not a pacifist either, and I really aligned with my view on foreign policy that he did, which is really unusual for a person like me who's been in the military all their life, studied at the war colleges, those kind of things, and then this guy who's a businessman and a TV host, he had a really good view of what it means to go back to the old slogan, peace through strength. And I think you saw it coming about even at the very end of the administration. There weren't missiles flying. China wasn't talking so bellicose and aggressive. The Russians obviously hadn't done what they're doing now in the Ukraine and those kind of things, because this president himself knew what signals to give, whether he had a team completely around him that concurred or not. So it's good news that we've got to get a team focused on what he sees, but also a team that believes in the right way to do business on the endless war policy. And that's one, eliminate it, and two, get back to the realism, as you said. You mentioned border security. I've run on this issue just like I've run on the endless war issue before for a national race. And border security is the most important issue for domestic citizens in the United States, and the number one issue for legal Mexican American citizens or Hispanic American citizens that have come here legally. It is the number one issue, and they are adamantly opposed to illegal aliens coming through like what's happening today under the Biden administration. Where are we going to go with that if we get back into control of the White House and the Congress?
Well, if with a new Republican administration, conservative administration, I think that we have a plan in place that took quite a few months to 2 years to figure out how to deal with the parts of the law that act like a magnet. So there are certain current law provisions, as person shows up, the law wants you to treat them as if they're facing persecution. You got to let them automatically in. Well, it's not quite as easy as that, but we had to figure out a patchwork of policies, remain in Mexico, safe third country, to make sure you're going to go to the country in between before you go to the United States if you are facing an issue. Those are the kinds of things that can be implemented overnight while we build out the wall. But in the meantime, I think that we've got this challenge, which is Biden's in office at least for another 2 years, and court cases they just ignore. So court cases are really important, but we can't put all of our political capital in that, because a bureaucrat just doesn't move quickly and read to the letter of the court decision. So our view is we've got to empower state governors that have border security as a priority. In our minds, that's 2 of the 4 right now along the border, and to give them a constitutional option, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, for them to unilaterally secure the border, get it outside of federal immigration law, which we have bad court decisions on the books, and to say, how would our framers, how would our founders, as independent constitutional actors, how would they have approached this? They would have looked to the Constitution. The facts on the ground is that this is an invasion. There are commander-in-chief authorities that they retain in that instance. The Attorney General of Arizona has already agreed with our opinion on this. The person running to be the governor of Arizona has declared, Carrie Lake, that she would do this on day 1. I think this is something that can happen in both Arizona and Texas in the months in the next 6 months.
And I think it should happen. It should be done because we've got to change the calculus from a legal perspective and a perspective of state and federal power. And in order to do that, I think declaring an invasion is the most logical path forward. And one of the other policy issues I wanted to talk to you about is election integrity, and I see that as very closely tied to border security. Because I do believe that what the Democrats tell us is that they want to change the demographics of America so the Republicans can never win elections again. I don't think that theory really works for them based on the poll numbers we're seeing and the outcomes of the elections. But that's what they said they wanted to do. In case any of you Democrats out there want to call me a conspiracy theorist for replacement theory, I didn't say that. I just said what Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi have said over and over again, that they want to make it to where we never win again by changing the demographics of America. So what are you guys proposing on election integrity? It's a hot button issue. I know, I know a lot of people, about 60% of Americans still think something was not right with the 2020 election, and they don't have very high confidence in our election system.
Well, it's a priority for us for precisely that reason. We believe that the American people's voice was stolen from them in the last election, a combination of big tech, oligarchy at work, and the reality that there was systemic fraud at many different levels, a perfect storm with regard to what was going on with COVID, and that being used as a pretext to essentially keep the votes open as long as they needed to. And so we're doing a lot on this issue. There's a lot of people in this space, but where we are specifically focused is two fronts. Number one, the last election, Zuckerberg put $400 million of his own money to essentially privatize and outsource the local election facilities and officers to nonprofit organizations that were politicized by Democrat Party operatives. So think about the campaign, and you've been in the arena. Think about your opponent not just trying to get out the vote to his person, but also having the inside scoop from the people who are actually running the organization on being in the same team. Totally unfair, ridiculously unfair.
Yeah.
So the problem is that they're innovating, and they're innovating towards the use of federal dollars under the guise of voter registration, using an authority given to them and the motor voter, somewhat given to them. These agencies don't have the appropriations to do this voter registration activity. And so we're calling on them. We're raising the alarm bells on it. We want to put a chill in any bureaucrat that thinks that they're going to go forward and allow this spending, because there's criminal penalties associated with spending on something you don't have an appropriation for Congress. So that's one big area that we are focused on. And then we're trying, through our sister organization that I'm a president of as well, Citizens for Renewing America, we are working every day to be the hands and feet of Cleta Mitchell's Election Integrity Network, to make sure that we stand up these voter integrity networks to be the early alarm system for any efforts to steal the election in the months ahead, and then to arm those areas with enough poll watchers over time so that election integrity has a permanent infrastructure.
So that's Citizens for Renewing America, folks. And at the end of the program, we'll have Russ give out all information on where to find that. I have just read recently about federal agencies being tasked with doing voter registration and putting voter registration in areas that it wouldn't normally happen at. And I'm assuming you're talking about all of those agencies that we're hearing about, not very loudly, but just kind of at the surface. It's kind of popping through the surface. That's illegal, right? I mean,
yeah, we don't think they have the legal authority to do this.
Okay.
They're trying to bootstrap it from the motor voter laws that are authority, but we don't think they have the appropriations to go forward and do that. And that's really what's controlling. But think about if the public housing authorities are doing voter registration so that people feel like they're not going to have their housing benefits if they don't do voter registration, or these Job Corps centers that are across the country. it's an order of magnitude much greater. We're talking about billions of dollars. We're not talking about one instance of $400 million. Every one of these potential community health centers is all, big ticket money. And so it's a major problem. But I also think it's one that we have a game plan to be able to stop.
Okay. Well, I've got 3 more areas of policy I want to ask you about real quick. Big tech. I think I know what you're going to say. What's the plan for big tech in the next administration?
Well, on big tech, I kind of view this as a moving day at a golf tournament. I think this is Saturday in the sense that we have to win the argument that, and we're doing it on the conservative side of the aisle, that this kind of a libertarian perspective that because it's a private business, that we can't expect more from them is wrong, and that we don't have that view when it comes to common carriers and utilities. We do place expectations on them. We say, you are going to cover everyone in our neighborhood for electrical service. You're going to cover everyone, Comcast. And so we have got to establish an expectation that when a Republican majority takes control, we have the proposals, but the willingness to move forward and legislate on something like, say, Section 230 repeal, which is kind of no brainer. I mean, antitrust reform gets into some competing interests that need to be very, very carefully thought out, because I think the left has an interest sometimes in using our enthusiasm to get their game plan done. And so, Section 230, though, there should be literally no opposition to doing that carefully and repealing what has become effectively a shield for them to also have liability protections when they know crimes are being committed on their platforms, and for them to make editorial decisions that impact and censor us. So I think it's a big issue that needs to be tackled.
Oh, it certainly is. This episode, actually, I won't be able to run it as a YouTube live stream because we've talked about voter integrity here. They'll give me another strike. They've been hunting down all my shows where I talked about elections the last year. I mean, we've got to have some recourse because I'm making light of that, but my little business here should have been capable of making over $150,000 in the last 12 months, and it made 11 because of this. Because my platforms and my audience are across these platforms, and when they suppress you, they suppress your revenue stream, and I don't think that's right. I mean, we ought to be able to come to some accommodation so our voices can be heard like everybody else's.
And I think it's important to zoom out for perspective for a second. And I think this is why we have such a problem on the right, is that we don't realize that categories are a little bit fluid. So when we talk about a business, these are not businesses anymore. They are actually the enforcers of the regime's oligarchy viewpoint. So when you have the regime saying to the big tech, we want you to censor Alex Berenson on COVID grounds, they are now performing a duty of government that they are no longer just, in the business of commerce. And so you have to think about them differently, even though they call themselves differently. And quite frankly, this kind of category confusion is rampant on the right. I mean, today's version is that somehow, if you're going to go after the deep state of the FBI, that somehow that's defunding the police. Give me a break. It's not defunding the police. There's a complete unwillingness to separate categories and to realize what's actually going on. And the American people know this. And this is why they've had such a disconnect with their politicians for so long, is that the folks that said that they were with them couldn't get their categories straight to understand, no, we actually need to think about what's going on with these big tech firms.
Oh, absolutely. In the Alex Berenson case, Russ, that's exactly what I've been talking about. That is a government violation of my First Amendment rights if I'm the Alex Berenson person. The government's not allowed to do that. And it doesn't matter if Twitter's a private entity or YouTube or Google or any of those. If they are doing it at the behest of the government, they're violating my First Amendment rights to free speech. Amongst a whole host of other things. And I think we've got to get to the bottom of that. And I hope the next Congress will get to the bottom of that, because I think the Twitter thing is just the very tip of the iceberg. As we end here, I want to thank you again for coming up. But coming on the show, Russ, but Mar-a-Lago and the search warrant and the raid and all that, I was just appalled at that. And I read your tweet right away. I got it. The FBI must be broken into 1,000 pieces, investigated, defunded, abolished, rent asunder, and the GOP's got to wake up and fight. And then just hours ago, Mike Pence says, no, you can't criticize the FBI. That's like defunding, don't defund them. That's defunding the police. I think that's baloney. Number one, the FBI and the federal government don't really have police powers. It's all made up. But number two, we don't need a federal law enforcement arm like the FBI, do we?
Yeah, I mean, I think the FBI gave us their closing argument as to whether they are weaponized against the American people. And we've known that through the Russia hoax. And if you are schooled on the Russia hoax and you see the way that they manipulated FISA warrants and used press hit pieces that they promulgated in the press themselves on the basis of the Steele dossier, used those, took those press reports, put it in the FISA application, give it to the judge, got the approval, and then throughout the process has completely designed to take out a duly elected president. And then to see things like what happened in the kidnapping plot for Governor Whitmer, and to know that the 4 individuals, 2 of them have been mistrials, and 2 of them were acquitted because of the FBI's entrapment. And here's the key point. Yes, you would think that the head of the field office in Detroit would have been reprimanded. He didn't get reprimanded. He got promoted to the Washington field office. So for those who would say that this is somehow only a few people, this is Peter Strzok, this is Lisa Page, this is Andrew McCabe, who, by the way, were still paying their legal fees. For those who would say that, they have to reckon with the fact that you have a cultural problem and cultural incentives that the Michigan example shows that leads to the unmistakable conclusion that the FBI needs to be broken up. It needs massive overhaul. So what our viewpoint is that we need a wide open committee that we saw in the 1970s with Senator Frank Church to go after all the alphabet agencies to understand thoroughly the full scope of the case and to assess how these agencies should be reformed, broken up, and to get a sense of what are the authorities that we need to take away from the FBI. What do we need to do to break up their responsibilities and give them to other organizations? We're going to keep this country safe, but we're not safe right now. We have our own agencies weaponized against the American people. The National Security Division of the FBI stood up in the aftermath of 9/11, is part of the investigation against so-called domestic terrorists who are only concerned about critical race theory in the schools. So you tell me if they're safe. So that's what we're up against. We think it is one of the most critical issues we're facing. We don't govern ourselves anymore. And we want to be a people that governs itself once more. And we can't do that when we're up against a woke and weaponized administrative state. And we're going to do everything we can at the Center for Renewing America to deconstruct that state.
Well, thank you. And I'll do whatever I can to help you. As a matter of fact, I've got a 5-foot by 8-foot Betsy Ross flag that's going up on my flagpole right on a major highway here in South Mississippi, just to make the point to the FBI that you're not allowed to tell me I can't fly a flag, even if you say it's a domestic terrorist indicator. And I hope that committee also goes after the Patriot Act. You mentioned the organizations that were created after the Patriot Act. I've never agreed with the Patriot Act. I've never agreed with the lines of authorization, the lines of operation that were created amongst the intelligence community, because there were separations there for a reason. There were wide separations there for a reason, and we're witnessing the reasons right now. We are not protected from our own government.
We need to look at that, and we need to look at FISA. We need to look at the whole host of authorities that they're using in the games that they play, the way they use overclassification, the way they keep us out of their jobs using the background checks, the whole gamut to really develop the most critical case to take the American people when they're going to be deciding who to lead them as president, and to say this is what needs to be changed, and we've got a plan to do it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Russ. Tell my viewers where they can go sign up for Citizens for Renewing America. And I've had your Twitter account up on the screen the whole time, but any other social media accounts that they should go follow to and sign up for to stay in touch and really follow the Center for Renewing America, because it's the best set of America First policy issue initiatives that I've seen laid out of any organization, quite frankly.
Well, thank you. They can find us at americarenewing.com. At Russ Vought is my handle, both on Twitter, on Truth, and on Getter. The handle for the center is AM Renew Center. And we look forward to partnering with your viewers. And I thank you, Colonel, for the time to talk to them.
Oh, thank you, and give my best to your family. I go back a little ways with your wife.
You do.
In working in politics, and I appreciate everything that she's ever done for us and for our country, quite frankly. Have a great day, Russ.
You too. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Russ Vought, former director of OMB under President Trump, a great American who has got the intellect and the willfulness to put together an organization to be prepared for the next administration and to get in the fight now to protect America all the way down to the citizen level. Go check out Citizens for Renewing America and join Cleta Mitchell's group. I won't call it an army because I don't want the FBI coming after you guys. They're a group to protect the vote at Citizens for Renewing America. Until next week, I'm Rob Maness.